What are two common traits in some of the best collaborators or colleagues you've worked with? And are you good at spotting these early?
What are two common traits in collaborators that I enjoy working with?
Yeah, what are two traits common across some of the best collaborators you've had?
Trait number, one trait that I particularly value is clarity of thought and expression. Some of the best collaborators I've had have an ability to answer basic questions like, what are we doing here? Why are we doing this? Why this? Why not that? Both to know it and to answer it and to express that. I have certain features with which you can spot such clarity. Of course, over a prolonged dialogue, you'll be able to ask them questions and they'll be able to answer things. But I find that people who pause and listen and take their time before they actually respond to a question, that tends to be a very quick indicator to know that they're going to possess this quality. The second, I have very high respect for people who have just high bandwidth. It's very rare, and when you do, I want to hold on to such collaborators for dear life. Like people who can just, there are people who can just get things done, and they do not stop. They have a certain hunger in their belly where they will not rest till what's on their plate just gets done, and they you can spot that very easily. You can spot it's almost like playing tennis with someone who's playing with multiple rackets. Things are coming back at you faster than you can lob them over the net.
Yeah. What are two common traits across some of the best collaborators or colleagues you've worked with?
Well, humility is definitely one. Mm-hmm. When there's like someone who's trying to assert like a strong alpha personality, that has not worked. I kind of ruffle at authority, and I think that will also sort of can go over to collaborators who sort of act like they're authorities. So yeah, humility is one. I would say also just passion and being really involved in the project, like just really caring about it. I've had a lot of collaborators where, you end up doing most of the work, or, they're clearly sort of phoning it in. But I've also had amazing collaborations with people who care deeply about the work and put a lot of time into it. So yeah, I think those are probably the two.
Yeah. How do you spot these traits? Like, can you spot them early, and do you think you're good at spotting them?
The strengths in a collaborator?
Yeah, the humility and caring about the work.
Yeah, I mean, if you work with someone, even for a week or so, you can sort of get a sense of where their head is at in terms of the work. So I think that's been relatively straightforward. I don't think I've intentionally seeked out. That sounds wrong.
I don't know. Yeah.
Sought.
Yeah.
Sorry, it's smoky. My head is so fuzzy. I don't know what's happening. Sought. Yes, I haven't sought out. Look at me nailing my native language. Collaborators who have these properties, but I just naturally end up working with people like that. It's sort of naturally falls into place. Yeah.
Yeah, makes sense. What are two traits common across some of the best collaborators or colleagues you've worked with?
Well, the best collaborators or colleagues are smarter than me and complement me in some ways. So for particularly fruitful collaborations, these are people who are smarter than me. They're often technical, very strong technically, and often strong in technical aspects that I'm less strong in, so that this is a good collaboration, and we complement each other and we reinforce each other. I also tend to work well with people who are pragmatic, who are not ideological, who are not advancing a particular ideological agenda. So I really appreciate people who are very data-driven, who primarily pay attention to data and experimental results, and are very flexible in their thinking. What I find, even with a lot of experience, is that reality continues to be very surprising. If you let yourself be surprised, and if you perform experiments with an open mind and actually look at the data, your intuition will be broken pretty much on a weekly basis. Pretty much every week, there is some experimental results from some experiments that we do that breaks some of my intuition, that doesn't go the way I would have predicted. And it is very important to me to stay very open-minded, be very willing to revise my beliefs, but also be very willing to revise the project direction, because the original conception of the project that we start out with may just not be the best project after some experimental results come back, and maybe we notice something interesting that we had no idea about, or maybe something that we thought was a good idea and in fact underpinned the conception of the project turns out to just not be a very good idea. The way projects get in trouble and the way collaborations can get in trouble is if somebody becomes attached to an idea that just no longer seems as compelling or as consistent with experimental results. And since I'm very flexible, I basically have no qualms in just throwing out the old ideas, even last week's ideas, and just moving forward with whatever reality tells us. So the best collaborators for me basically have the same attitude, very pragmatic, very empirical, very data-driven.
Got it. What are two traits that tend to be common among some of the best collaborators or colleagues?
I think I have a very diverse set of colleagues and collaborators. I think that is people that I like working with, that they could, in many cases, they are also friends. So it's people that we also match in terms of personality. But I think that in particular is people that they also have a taste for crazy ideas. That's, they also want to do that. They don't get scared if the idea cannot be immediately written down with a clear loss function that you need to optimize and things like that. if you can write the loss function immediately, that's probably not a project I want to start doing right away. I mean, ideally at the end, you want to have that formulation that is very clean.
Yeah.
But you don't want to start with that. And some people are really great at that, and they are great at starting with that formulation. I'm terrible at that. And so I prefer not to start with that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the other thing is that the collaborators many times, they also complement my lack of some skills. So maybe some of the things that I lack that they are much better than I am.
Yeah. And how do you spot these traits? Do you think you can spot them early?
Yeah, I think so. I think so. I think that all the collaborators that I had and all the different collaborations, I have always enjoyed them. I actually collaborate with a lot of people, so it could be also that I'm just quite flexible also of adapting to different personalities. So I don't need to be too picky on the characteristics that a person needs to fulfill for me to be able to work with that person. Because, for instance, at MIT, I think that right now, at least over the years, I've been working with maybe 14 or 15 groups. So that's a lot of groups.
Yeah.
And that's just with me. So yeah, I think I like collaborating. Actually, I enjoy collaborations even more than working alone. I think that part of the work, what I like is the social aspect also of the work itself, and how you are with a group of people that suddenly enjoy coming up with an idea or finding a solution, and you are all enjoying that moment. And I really like that.
Yeah. What are two common traits among some of your best collaborators or colleagues?
They're smart and they're good. But it's true. They're smart and get things done.
Yeah. And can you spot these traits early? Are you good at spotting them?
Well, I would say, I mean, I don't want to advertise for it, but it kind of like lots of people at FAIR are smart and good at what they do. So that's easier. After that, for recruiting, finding people, often you can have some sense of their records. I think it's much easier for us than it is for example, for spotting software engineers or people like this, where you actually don't have a record, right? So it's harder.
Yeah.
But I think, I think it's much easier to spot if somebody's smart than if they're effective. Yeah.
Makes sense. What are two traits that are common to some of the best collaborators or colleagues you've had?
I think the ability to communicate fuzzy ideas. See, when something has been fully worked out, it's easy to describe, right? I mean, a mathematical argument is in some sense easy to communicate, right? I mean, it may take a little bit of time and you may have to read it twice to understand it, but at some level it's very easy. Okay, but often when we are working on a problem, we have half-baked ideas. And somehow a good collaborator is one with whom you can communicate in these half-baked ideas and get some reaction. Okay, so I think that I need to have that ability, and that other person needs to have that ability. And this takes time, and I think some of it is just getting to know the person, but some of it is also a person's style. And because they have to, so that is what I think is very important in a collaborator, or you need to build it up. I think that, I mean, I found that the people with whom I initially was not at that level, but over time we got that way. And the second is that when you're talking to some people, as you are explaining to them, you find that it all becomes clear to you yourself. So the task So in a sense, it's all happening inside you. You're trying to explain to somebody or discuss with somebody or make the case. And in that process, you have an aha moment. I mean, okay.
Yeah.
And I think that when you have people like that are great fun to be with.
Yeah.
Okay. And I think so. You need to have people who are not who are challenging, but also willing to take the effort to listen to quarter-baked or half-baked ideas. And you need to have the kind of trust that if somebody challenges you, that doesn't mean that they disrespect you, right? And I think that that this is something that I think a lot of young people need to learn, because I think we are getting into a state where people feel that, or if somebody challenges me, then maybe they don't respect me or don't respect my work or whatever. No, I think when somebody challenges you is the best way to make your ideas sharper. And some of my best friends and colleagues, I mean, I respect them because they will challenge me and not let me get away with BS.
Yeah. Are these traits easy to spot though? Are they easy to spot early? And do you think you can spot them well?
Well, sometimes you can hit off right away, and sometimes you need to develop the trust. I think that that's a personality specific thing. I think that with some people you acquire this after initially they are all very proper and respectful, but after a little while of getting to know them, then they're much more open with their opinions. And I think that that's perfectly fine. I mean, I think that this is one of these things where it changes with age and seniority, right? When I was younger and I was exactly at the same level of experience with other people, it was much easier to have these frank conversations, right? Because they didn't think of me as any more senior or any more knowledgeable. Okay, when you are slightly more senior and slightly more knowledgeable, or may not really be knowledgeable, but you may just be thought of as knowledgeable, then that can crimp the relationship a little bit, right? Because they might not feel comfortable. They may not know how I would react to being challenged.
Right.
Right. So this is a case of you have to work this out. I think you work this out by actually. It's a repeated game, to use the lingo, right? You have multiple interactions, and then over those interactions, each person builds a model of the other person, which makes it more efficient. So that's why I find it super, super easy to work with with like people who are my former students, even if I encounter them 5 years later, because that level of individual trust is already there. Right. Otherwise, it can be developed, but it has to be developed. And I think, this is one thing about my time at Facebook, which has been interesting, which is that instead of just dealing with my own students, I was dealing here with colleagues and collaborators an equal level. And here you develop that comfort over time through multiple interactions.
Right.
And it's a different style, but I found it interesting.
Yeah. What are a couple of common traits among some of the best collaborators or colleagues you worked with?
So being really good communicator, I think is really, really key. So like that is between someone who's just really effective and can execute really fast, but is just really, really bad at explaining what they've done, and someone else who executes less rapidly, but like exactly what they've done. They're really good at communicating both what they've done and what they haven't done, and also what they're certain about and what they're less certain about. Like I will take that second person, without a doubt. Because otherwise, whenever you interact, you end up asking a lot of questions, just trying to go through, and it's just not. It's kind of it becomes painful. It's just not something you enjoy. So I think that's one thing that's pretty key. I mean, it's fun if the other person is bringing like a different point of view. Like I guess like one of my, there's a few favorite collaborations, but one is with folks at Université Laval, François Laviolette, Mario Marchand, and other people there. When we did the work on domain adversarial networks, they were not really deep learning or neural networks people, but they had really strong learning theory knowledge. And it's François Laviolette who at some point sort of described to me some concept in learning theory about domain adaptation, and I had a hunch that maybe there was like, it would say something about how we should be training neural nets for domain adaptation. And it sort of happened like that I could very quickly propose a basic algorithm that we could do that. So this is an example where he was really good at taking that theory and explaining it to me in ways I could understand it, so that I could connect it with things that I knew and connect it to a specific problem that I could design an algorithm for. And he came with also a very different point of view from mine as to, and a different expertise. And, similarly, like my collaboration that I did with Ryan Adams and Jasper Snook on hyperparameter optimization, which led to our startup and then eventually us going in industry. Ryan Adams, again, was coming, and Jasper as well, coming with some Bayesian learning and Bayesian non-parametrics background that I didn't have. So that was also a really fruitful collaboration, I think, partly for that. And that's something that in general I do see like a big value of, is putting people together that are good communicators and have like diverse expertise. I took that partly also from Jeff Hinton's lab. It was very much like that in terms of his postdocs. Like, Ryan Adams was a postdoc there. You had Ian Murray also necessarily coming with like deep neural networks expertise, but probabilistic modeling expertise. And we did the paper on neural autoregressive density estimation together. And sort of from that, I took like that this was something quite valuable.
Yeah. How do you spot these traits early? Are you good at spotting them early?
I mean, except like through, if you had the chance of like talking with those folks at conferences or something like that, you would probably pick it up just because I think you just feel it. Like if you're on the same page, is something that it's kind of hard to miss, and it's actually really enjoyable when you have a conversation where whatever you're saying, they see where you're going, they understand what you're saying, and so I guess I can't say I was that intentional. A lot of these sort of these collaborations came from just being like the people being friendly people that I enjoyed talking with, and which I guess is another trait in some sense. Like if I'm going to be in collaboration with someone, and that person is kind of friendly and caring and respectful and so on, which would be someone you would be driven towards just for, just to be a friend or be a sort of, a friendly colleague to have. I think this is how these kinds of collaborations can sort of naturally occur.
Yeah. What are two common traits among some of the best collaborators or colleagues you've worked with?
Usually, I mean, it's going to be easy ones, but usually good communication, just, being transparent, being able to, stay where things are and really engage pretty transparently. Good collaboration, definitely. And I think also like a certain generosity towards like our joint purpose, right? Like just this commitment that the outcome of the project is more important than each of our personal outcomes. And if the project is successful, it's going to be a success for everyone who's contributed. That kind of mindset is really, I think, good ingredients, probably the two best ingredients for a good collaboration.
Yeah. And do you have good ways of spotting these traits early and spotting them well?
It's a little hard at times. I tend to sort of kind of watch out early days and see how it goes. I tend to be, I think, very transparent in my expectations of people in the project. So pretty early on, I'll state like, here's what I'm willing or able to contribute to this project. What are you able to? Does the sum of this lead to something interesting? Having these discussions pretty early on. I will say for a lot of my collaborations, especially the work that I do with healthcare and medicine, I also look for people who really are experts in their domain, like people who really have clarity about the important problems, who have access to high quality data, who know how to write great papers and influence the field. And I think, you just need to partner with these people for the work to have impact. There's no point partnering with someone who's not an expert in their field, because I certainly am not an expert in their field. So for any of these projects, I also always look out for that and partnering with people who I think are already having very significant scientific impact in their own field. It's kind of, for me, the best vehicle to make progress.
Yeah, makes sense. What are a couple of traits that you have seen commonly amongst some of your collaborators or colleagues that you've enjoyed working with most?
I like working with people who are human and who are, I don't know, there's probably a million ways to say it, but just nice, like people who are pleasant to talk to and know that everybody who's involved is dealing with a lot of things and going through God knows what in their life and probably have a million other projects. And so, not having unrealistic expectations about others and cutting them, giving them room to be themselves. I think that's one of the nice things about academia is people can be quirky and we can all kind of get along and give each other space to be weird in the ways we need to be weird, because we're all trying to do creative work, and what works for one person can be very different than another. And so my favorite collaborators have been people who are totally happy to run with, whatever those around them need to make it work. And, I think there's a certain degree of like open discussion that some people are able to have, where you can say, this is how I like to work. Does this work for you? And like that, I don't know, sort of like meta conversation around the process is often really helpful for making collaborations work well, rather than just assuming that everybody is going to do it your way. I don't know. I'm much more inclined to, I actually think some people I've known will say very openly that their collaborations are driven entirely by their connections with the people and not at all by the technical goals. I don't think I'm quite that far. I think I have to believe in the scientific goals, but I think that's a big ingredient. Like I have to kind of like the people. Yeah.
And have you found good ways to spot this early?
No. I mean, I think like a lot of things, I think there's like an intuitive thing that happens where you click, but you can't really explain why. Yeah. It's the same thing with PhD students. Honestly, I think I'm not particularly good at giving advice on how to select PhD students, but there's a kind of conversation you have with people, and you just sort of know it's going to be great. And you hope that's not like, you know, a bias thing where you're latching on to, oh, this person sounds like me, or, you know, they look like me or something. I don't think it is, given the makeup of my group, but yeah, we have to be careful about that. But honestly, no, I think it's very, you have to kind of give yourself room to trust yourself as a creative person. And once you have your classifier, you don't necessarily need to explain it for finding people to work with. We probably can't, honestly. I don't think we have that kind of insight into our own cognition.
Yeah. What are some common traits amongst the best colleagues, collaborators you worked with?
Sure. So common traits are that they're really smart, really creative, and then they're all driven in some way. Like passionate about what they do. And then this is not talking about the people I work with directly, but I think the very, very best people in the field are like insecure in some fundamental way. And that's what drives them to just constantly push themselves to do better. I just think that's somehow an essential piece of it. Not that they're bad in any way, but that they're so motivated. You know, what is it that motivates them? Anyway, but yeah, I've been so lucky to work with just really smart people, and it makes it so much fun.
Yeah. Have you found ways to be able to spot some of these traits early and to spot them well?
No, I feel like I'm just, as far as I'm concerned, kind of notoriously bad with spotting people, you know, from just one meeting or something who are just going to be great. It's very hard for me to get that right.
What are some traits that are in common with some of the best collaborators or colleagues you've had?
So I think I really like when people I am collaborating with, they can sort of stay to the point, as in like sometimes it happens in a project that people, oh, we can also try this, we can also try this, we can also try this, and then but it's not clear where that is going. It starts like digressing in different directions. So if people can stay on track and like see that, okay, this is where we need to move forward, I think I like that. And B, I think complementary strengths are always appreciated. So if they have any kind of strength or expertise in field that I'm not expert in, I think that's valuable as well.
Yeah. And are you good at being able to spot these? Like, can you spot these early?
I don't think so. I think I only figure it out. So there is like, I cannot figure it out before I agree to collaborate with them.
Yeah.
But once I'm collaborating with them, then maybe after a few brainstorming sessions, I can figure it out. Yeah, but then I have to stick to it.
Yeah. What are some traits that you found to be common among some of the best collaborators or colleagues you worked with?
Honestly, it's being able to listen to others, valuing others' skill sets, and also being creative.
Yeah. And do you feel like you found ways to spot these well?
I have. Most of my collaborators are not in engineering or computer science. Most of my collaborators have specialties in other domains, whether it's in, you know, ethics, philosophy, cognitive science, healthcare, physiology. And so usually the first thing is, if they're interested in what I'm doing and I'm interested in what they're doing, even though we're in two different domains, that's the start of a beautiful conversation. And that's usually the very first kind of like, okay, I don't understand what you're doing. You're speaking a language I don't understand, but it's interesting. And they say the same thing, and you just continue. And that's pretty much how all of my collaborators have come about.
Yeah, yeah. What are a couple of common traits that you found in some of the best collaborators or colleagues you've worked with?
So I think, well, I guess like my favorite trait maybe in a collaborator is just being like reliable, like being able to count on them to do something. Mm-hmm. But I think like more generally, I think one of the best traits that somebody can have, which I think is not something I'm that strong in, is being able to motivate people very effectively. So I think like the most like outstanding like researchers and managers are able to motivate people like extremely well, to get them to have like to develop their internal motivation to like work towards the same goal. So I think that's a really admirable trait. But working with people, I just mainly enjoy when they communicate well, when we're able to like divide up stuff and do it effectively and not require like a lot of micromanagement. And when they have like skill when they have like skills that are different than mine. So like if they're, you know, stronger in some technical areas or in some like knowledge areas that I'm not as strong in.
Yeah, yeah. And have you found ways to be able to spot these traits early?
So by collaborator, do you mean like somebody that I'm writing a grant with, or somebody that I'm like a employee or student, or?
I think in any of these, just anyone that you expect to be working closely with. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think for a lot of kinds of collaboration, like with peers, it tends to there's not really a filtering process in the same way that there would be with students or employees. And so in that case, like, I would say what I usually will find, like, usually I would start doing something with somebody, and then I would find out, like, you know, do we have like a good rapport, or do we communicate effectively, or do we have conflict? So that just kind of comes out through that working experience. I think for like cases where I am filtering, like for graduate students or when hiring, then I think I don't know. I think it's actually like really hard to identify early whether in like what I'll think of somebody in 6 months.
Yeah.
I think like one thing that I think seems kind of consistent, and it doesn't really go to I guess it's part of what I enjoy in the collaborator, but looking to see like what people do that they didn't have to do is often like a good indicator for like whether somebody will be effective in the long term. So usually I think somebody that does like projects on their own, or like just goes beyond like what's required of them routinely, will be like somebody who will also like push through problems that they encounter in the future, and will not need like a lot of like direction from me.
Yeah.
And so I look for that when I'm trying to work with somebody or trying to hire somebody.
Yeah. What are some traits that you found to be in common across some of the best collaborators or colleagues you've had?
Yeah, I've been so lucky to have amazing collaborators both at NVIDIA and Caltech, and even in the broader ecosystem. Being a very collaborative person, and that's enabled me to go into new areas that wouldn't be possible on my own. For instance, one of the recent papers we recently published in a clinical journal on using computer vision for robotic surgery, right? And understanding the gestures there, and that leads to the quality of recovery. So there is a lot of like importance to doing that well. So understanding those domain-specific requirements and right, like how AI can make an impact, that was really cool. Another example is in quantum computations, like how to speed them up from traditional methods and be able to still take in domain-specific features, right? Rather than just use a standard neural network, give it the raw data. It cannot transfer to larger molecules. It cannot do zero-shot generalization. So be able to have that domain knowledge, decide what from the domain we need to pick. And for that, that has to be a very close, trusted relationship with collaborator, in this case, Tom Miller, who's faculty at Caltech. Right, so understanding that is critical for us to make an impact. So my best collaborations have come about where there are complementary skills like this, because then you're in this process of exploring what the other person has to bring to the table and brainstorming and doing it in a very non-judgmental way, because there is a lot of aspects that I don't know. So I can be extremely dumb, but I can say, I don't know this, teach me this.
Yeah.
So yeah, people who are also open to that, right? Who can that way take my advice and say like, just because a model is hyped up in literature doesn't mean that's the right thing. So both who can give that broad perspective of the field, like, so they're not only promoting their own methods in the field, but saying, look, this is what broadly the field looks like, and be able to have a door for me to share the same. I think those are always the best collaborations for me.
Yeah, makes sense. What are some traits that you found to be in common amongst your best collaborators or colleagues that you've enjoyed working with?
I think people are very different, and they approach things very differently. And I recognize that when I see people, I'm working with them at a snapshot of their time right now. They change over time. But I think two things that I really do value. One is the sense of kind of intellectual curiosity, particularly with collaborators I'm working with on research, and dealing well, or learning to deal well with failure. Because as researchers, we experience failure all the time. It could be because we had an idea that seemed good, but it really wasn't. It didn't match the world. It could be cases where people made a decision regarding your paper and other things, and you got rejected, a wide number of things. So I think being able to deal well with failure is something that I think is a skill that's worth developing. And similarly, I think this notion of curiosity is worth cultivating, because that's something where, again, the right, good ways to approach a problem may come from areas where you hadn't anticipated them in the first place. And I take it as an opportunity when I'm working with people to really learn from them, regardless of, what our relationship might be, and to really try to view this as a peer relationship when it's about research. So those two things I think are important to me.
Yeah. And have you found ways to be able to spot these things, like intellectual curiosity or being able to deal with failure early on, or yeah?
I'd be very arrogant to say that I'm any good at that. But what I can say is that whoever I work with, I try to help them in those two directions as I'm helping myself. So I don't kick myself with the starting conditions. I say, this is what we have, this is where we are, and how can we get better from it? I mean, I think that there are people who are probably much better at, at spotting these things. But I feel that, when I look back at the people I collaborated with, I don't think my first impressions are necessarily that accurate. And I think over time, I just realized that I shouldn't put too much weight on it, and instead benefit from working with people in the best way possible.
Yeah, makes sense. This is a little related to the next question, but what are a couple of traits that you found to be in common with some of the best colleagues or collaborators you've worked with?
I think having a good vision of where you want to get, and then how do you break that down into what are the sort of series of steps you need to get to along the way in order to do that. And I think that can occur at lots of different levels. It might be like what are you trying to do today? Or it might be like, what do we hope to accomplish in the next 3 years? But I think being able to kind of squint at something and say, oh, we want to go there, but then say, okay, well, if we want to go there, here are the 3 things we need to do, and then the thing we can do after that once we've done that. That's something that I think I've seen in other people, and I feel like I'm sort of okay at that as well, is kind of having a vague path in mind.
Yeah. And have you found ways to be able to spot this trait in people early?
I think the best way to do it is to work closely with someone on a problem or a thing, because you can sort of see how they organize their own thoughts, how they sort of think about, okay, well, if we need to do this, what do we need to do? And some people, I think, just can't see as many steps ahead or can't see what they need to do 3 steps beyond, and that sometimes means they make suboptimal choices in the first step.
Yeah. What are a couple of common traits that you found amongst your best colleagues, best collaborators, best students that you worked with?
Common tricks.
Common traits, like common characteristics in these.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Let's see. I think one of them is I think one of them is that being organized, in the sense that they will make notes. They'll make notes in themselves in the meetings, and they'll summarize the meeting, even though they're not maybe they're senior enough, but they don't really need to do that. This is one of the I think the kind of the smartest people I work with, they all have this kind of the characteristics that they can stay organized and think about in terms of priorities, and to get things done. So they are very efficient, and instead of doing all the stuff, they kind of be able to prioritize things and tackle the most important problems. That's one of them. And the other one, I think, is that they stay very curious and still learning. That's surprising for me, because I thought that senior people are just they basically just throw out high-level ideas, but without actually thinking about how you actually do that. But kind of with interaction with several more senior people, I found that it's not the case. They still are very sharp, and they still are very hands-on and learn a lot of new things in the field. So that's something that I really kind of aspire to, not to detach with the not because because you are getting more and more seniors, and be still try to stay curious, stay positive, stay learn new things.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah.
And so for example, when you said that students, for instance, that if they're organized and they know how to prioritize things and so on, have you found good ways of being able to spot these characteristics early on?
Yeah. So what I would do is that I'll try to, no matter what, I will still ask them to come up with a list, come up with the priority themselves, and then I'll sit with them to go over the list to see maybe if you swap this order, you can get something insightful, or maybe there's some other task that you must do that's required, but maybe it's kind of separate track. So it's a one-shot effort, maybe kind of constructing the baseline to get some other people's results, something like that. So you can maybe higher priority. So yeah, but I will still ask students to basically come up with their own list, even though I know what could be the more efficient ways. But I guess that's one of my kind of tricks that I always ask students to do this themselves, and then try to revise them. When you work with them like this, I found that they can learn this. Next time that they do, they understand that, okay, from X to Y. So basically you provide this training data for them, and next time they can do, they train their neural network, and they can do this similar things.
Yeah.